Welcome to T-Smack, home of the T-Smack. May I take your order?
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, and comics. I am your host, Josh Scar, and joining me this week is the one, the only, the Wikipedia-filled database that is Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I cannot complain. I am doing a podcast with one of my oldest friends, going to talk about two properties that I absolutely adore. It is going to be a good time.
Oh, shucks.
And we got a What You Doing coming up, so we're getting to your time to shine here. We got comics,
baby.
What You Doings.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, the season of Matt is upon us. Once again, after August.
Yeah. Talking Matt.
All right. There we go. That'll be your spinoff. You just rant about whatever you need to. So we're here to talk about a comic crossover event that I absolutely adore. We're going to talk about the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover from 2019. But before we do that, we're going to hear from our friends J and K over at the Fuck My Work Life podcast. We'll be right back.
Working can be such a drag, but it's a necessary evil.
What better way to combat the woes of the working world than to commiserate with your fellow man?
I'm Jay.
And I'm Kay.
And we're the hosts of Fuck My Work Life, a comedy podcast where we share people's stories from the workplace.
Whether they're funny, weird, scary, or just plain messed up, they're always entertaining and may leave you thinking you don't have it so bad after all.
Available on all major podcast platforms. Give us a listen. Your sanity may just depend on it.
It's very true. J and K offer a wonderful slice of relief when it comes to getting some work bullshit off your chest, or just hearing them get that off their chest. And you're like, yes, me too.
Work, who needs it?
I wish not me. So close to winning that 1.73 billion, but not really. I won $4 that night.
Someday. Maybe, you know what? Every penny.
Exactly. So, Matt, we're here to talk about one of our favorite things, which is comic books. But more specifically, we are here to talk about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2019. Ryan Parrott is the writer. Simone di Meo is the illustrator. Colors by Walter Baiamonte with color assistance by Igor Monti and letters by Ed Dukeshire. There are variant covers and a bunch of other things, which if you're a fan of either of these franchises, IPs, whatever you want to call them, every cover of the Power Rangers comic, let alone this one with the TMNT, it's just worth every penny, I would say. It's just so good. I have a lot of these variants, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. Most of these covers, I think, were also written by drawn by Dan Mora, who is just a fantastic artist.
Yeah, he's great. And, one of the things I've written down here, in previous episodes, I've done little breakdowns of, context and historical, where they are in that moment in time. And part of that is I don't really have that here just because, I was reading comics around 2011 and I was aware of what was going on with Flashpoint. I read Spider-Verse at the time, and both of those, I think, in their own right, were very, it's going to sound bad to say it, significant. Not to say that this book is not, but they Spider-Verse was a cultural moment. Flashpoint was a huge shift in DC Comics. So I don't have as much written down, but I've got a couple things here that I'll break us down with real quick. I wrote down the thing you mentioned about, came out in 2019, 5-issue miniseries starting in December, running through June 2020, co-published by Boom Studios and IDW. Boom Studios is the Power Ranger side, IDW is the TMNT side. And, you mentioned the creative breakdown, all that stuff. It's part of, both of the miniseries is part of a sort of larger expansion into Power Rangers comics as a brand, a universe by Boom Studios, which started back in 2016 with a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers title that focused on the classic team, which is the team we have represented here, the one that you know from the old TV show, the original TV show, and since expanded into a larger line with lots of spin-offs and various line-wide crossovers that brought in all kinds of other Rangers from other shows. And IDW has been publishing a reboot of the TMNT comics consistently since 2011. It's over 100 issues now. This will be followed up in December of last year, 2022, with a miniseries called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, which was by Ryan Parrott and illustrated by Dan Mora, who, as you said, is great. He does a lot of the covers here, the standard covers. As you informed me right before we started recording, this is not the first time these properties have crossed over. Way back in 1998, their Power Rangers in Space aired a crossover that was between that show and TMNT, The Next Mutation, which was a live-action nightmare horror show of a kids show. It was the 4th episode of that season, Shell Shocked. The Power Rangers wiki listed as season 6, which I believe just means that it is the 6th season of like every season of Power Rangers overall combined. But I think Power Rangers in Space was one of those, like, I think at a certain point they all become one season shows.
Yeah, and they just continue the Power Ranger line in their own way. Because, yeah, like Mighty Morphin ran for 2 seasons, but that was still like almost 100 episodes respectively between the 2 seasons.
Yeah, kids TV is really weird too, like that.
And then like season 2, I think was Z, or season 3 was Zeo. Then I think they did 4 seasons of Turbo. That was the one where they had the movie where the worst Power Ranger ever, Rocky, loses his spot on the team to a literal child. And then I think once Turbo wrapped up, they moved on into Power Rangers in Space.
Yeah. I think that might have been the first time. You know, it's maybe notable because part of it is those first several iterations are in some way or another the same sort of lineage, right? Where it's like...
Yeah, at least Tommy and a couple of other, like, at least second generation Rangers carry over. And I think Billy sticks around through Turbo as well.
Yeah. And even
he just moves on into a mentorship kind of role.
Yeah. And if nothing else, like even if, you know, whatever the main cast looks like, it's not obviously all the same people, but like people cycle in in a staggered kind of way, right? Where eventually the main cast looks nothing like the original cast, but it's like some of those guys came in the second wave and then the third wave and then the fourth wave. So it's all like,
you could draw a family tree back to the original roster.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think in Space was maybe the first time that it was like, this is like basically a heart reboot where it's an entirely new cast, an entirely new scenario. And like nobody mentions the word Zordon or whatever. Maybe they do.
I think Zordon was still I think Zordon was still around in Space.
Okay.
Because I know there's a whole... I stopped watching Power Rangers at some point through Zeo. I didn't care for the designs of like the Zords and stuff. But I know there's like a Zordon saga or a Zordon era where at one point Zordon sacrifices himself and dies, and then like there's the post-Zordon era.
Sure.
So I think In Space continues with Zordon and kind of like he exists as a being in the morphing grid, so he can exist in all space and time at any given point.
Yeah, and that exposes maybe some of my another reason that I just don't have a ton of, you know, a lot of the knowledge I was pulling from the other 2 episodes we've done were like things I already kind of knew and just kind of like bulked up on with a little research. But I'll admit, you know, as a kid, I watched a lot of Power Rangers. It was huge. Every kid at that age was watching it. I was really into the Ninja Turtles as a kid. These are not necessarily franchises that I have like kept up with, right? I've not followed them. So like In Space was like well after my time that I was watching it consistently. So it's like, who knows what Zordon's up to? Not me, not this guy, you know?
Yeah, same. I fell off of Ninja Turtles faster than I think I fell off of Power Rangers. I have a very vivid memory of I went to my my childhood doctor, who weirdly enough was named Dr. Fang, which like that's not a name you want for your doctor. But he always had a TV running in his waiting room that was usually running like CBS or some kind of like kids programming. And on this particular afternoon, when I was at the doctor's office for some kind of checkup, they were playing Ninja Turtles. It was like, oh man, I haven't seen Ninja Turtles in forever. I didn't know it was still running. And then like Leonardo was some weird mutant werewolf turtle. I don't really know. Like it was kind of like a Hulk sort of situation where he would transform and he wouldn't really have control, and he would just be like this rabid animal and just run amok everywhere. And I was like, I don't like this. So thank goodness I dropped off. It just got really weird.
I was a huge Ninja Turtles fan. As I had like bed sheets, I had toys. My mom took
Oh
me to a
yeah.
thing. It was well before it was like when I was just a very small child. It took me to like a photo op for my birthday with like someone in a Ninja Turtles like suit, and I was very excited because it was going to be Raphael, who's my favorite, and it ended up being
Of course.
Donatello.
Oh no, not
So I was like,
Donatello.
so I was like, I was very happy, but I was also like, it wasn't really the guy that I wanted. This isn't how I fell off Ninja Turtles, but there was an extended period where I did not engage with the franchise because I was really into that and He-Man. And one day I was at school or camp or something where like I'm congregating with other kids, and I decided we just decided to play Ninja Turtles with one of my friends. The only problem was I didn't tell him that, so it seemed to him like I just started kicking him. And so I was grounded from the shows that were considered maybe more violent, that were making me act out for a little while. So that's a little
Informed
lore.
consent, Matt.
Yeah,
Informed
that's
consent.
a little lore for you about me.
So let's get into this comic because as I said up top, I unabashedly love this comic. I was really excited when we talked about this, you agreed that we could do this one because I remember really enjoying it when it came out, and like maybe I had pandemic goggles on, lockdown goggles, whatever you would want to call it. Because as we mentioned, it like half of the later half of the series came out during lockdown.
Yeah, the early days of the pandemic. Yeah.
And so like maybe it was just a comfort food, whereas like these are things I love. I don't really care about the quality. They're coming together. But I gotta say, upon a reread, it hits every checkbox I could even have for a franchise like this. It's Saturday morning goodness.
Yeah, and I mean, like I had never read it before, and I don't dislike these franchises, but like I said, I'm not like someone who it's not the thing that I would like immediately go to, right? But it is kind of like everything you kind of want from a crossover like this in a fan servicey way, but not like in an overly fan servicey way, right? Where it's like, there's an interesting story, interesting reason for these characters to meet up. The setup kind of begs the question: oh, what if the Turtles were Power Rangers? Well, that happens in this. Oh, what if the Rangers were basically ninjas? That happens in this. Shredder becomes a Power Ranger at one point. Like
that Shredder design is so good.
Yeah, we're throwing the toys together. Like the story opens with, and it doesn't waste a bunch of time either. Like the setup is these guys just happen to coexist in the same world. We're not having to like, oh, they fell into a portal and
multiversing crossing. Yeah.
There's no like straining to figure out why these guys are here. It's just the Power Rangers live in a fictional California city, and across the country in New York, also the Power Rangers are there. So it sets up with like, where's Tommy? Oh, he's in New York doing Ninja Turtle stuff, and that leads to them eventually coming together and fighting and then teaming up, which is like the classic setup of this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I absolutely love the fact that Ryan Parrott just went, they exist in the same world. I'm not going to create some bullshit like dimensional crossover thing, which if we talk about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Justice League crossover, maybe that's something we get into. But
well, I think it lends itself more to I think the Justice League one, I haven't read it, but that's one I think you have to explain more, right?
Yeah.
Like, the DC universe is this whole cosmology where like everything is kind of accounted for to some degree. Where like this is like
the Turtles just exist.
They never talk about what's going on in California. They live in New York, vice versa, right?
Exactly. And the Turtles operate in the shadows. They operate in secret and silence. Their motto is like, if you get seen, you get killed, or something to that effect. So like they just don't have to acknowledge each other in a sense that it's like, oh man, the Ninja Turtles, we've heard about you. Oh, the Power Rangers, we know all about you. Although there is that moment, like I have it pulled up right now. There's a single page spread in issue 2 after the Turtles and the Rangers kind of come to an understanding. The Rangers reveal their identities, and the Turtles are like, oh my God, they're teenagers too. Holy cow, cool. And they all end up in the Turtles' lair. And my two favorites, which I know I made a joke about it earlier, but even as a kid, like Donatello was my favorite. I don't know why. I love the bow staff. Just being able to manipulate that thing and twirl it around is like, that's cooler than swords. I don't care if it's just made of wood. And then as I've gotten older, Billy has become my favorite Power Ranger. And these two are just having a moment where Tawny is just like, you want to see my robot? Speaking
Yeah.
of Metalhead, and Billy's like, oh yeah, I saw that. That's cool. We have a robot too. His name's Alpha. And he's like, oh, what are you working on? I'm working on a Geiger counter so we can try and find Tommy. Oh, cool. I can maybe help you with that. Billy's like, I got it. He's like, oh, we got a blimp. I made a shrink ray. I did this. It's like Donnie's just trying to show off, and Billy's just very nonchalant. He's like, I'm doing my work, man. Like, I've got this. I've seen that. And then Donnie says something that like piques Billy's interest, like a rocket powered skateboard. And Billy's just like, ooh, there's an idea. I could use one of those in Angel Grove. And then they just keep bonding to the point where Donatello's like, you let me test drive one of the Zords. And it's just such a good moment between two characters who are nerdy in like a tech sense, but they have like this, or at least Donatello is established to have like a fandom of the Power Rangers. And so like he's trying to create this common ground. It's like meeting a celebrity. You're like, oh, you like French fries? I love French fries. You're like, oh man, look at all the things we have in common. And it's
go ahead. Yeah. Finish your thought. Yeah.
It's just really sweet, sincere. And it nails the characterizations of both these characters that I really love. And it's just, it like I said, it hits me in that marshmallowy Saturday morning goodness.
Yeah, and it's full of moments like that. Like those are characters that make sense because they're analogs to each other, right? They're like, most teams or lots of teams have like the nerdy dork, right? They're the nerdy smart guy who's like good with gizmos. So we're throwing them together and seeing what happens. You've got some stuff with April O'Neil and Kimberly, right? Where they're spending a lot of the story together for various reasons.
Zach and Michelangelo get thrown together, which seems like an odd pairing, or like one that they're just kind of like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
but they do a good job of making them relatable.
Yeah, and maybe that has more to do with, I've read some of those Power Rangers comics, but maybe that's some characterization from that Parrott is drawing off of. But like Jason and Leonardo as the leaders are sort of bonding over like fighting styles and stuff, and Tommy and
Raph have their thing.
they're like sort of the hothead wild cards, right? So like they go head to head a couple times. The story ends with them like, it's time for a rematch, buddy, and that's like their freeze frame moment.
Mm-hmm. Trini does get a little shortchanged in this one, though. She has a couple of moments with Splinter because they're both kind of more like reserved, and I think they just needed someone to let Trini bounce off of. So they're like, we got no one else, so Shredder, because she's not going to really relate to Casey Jones.
Yeah, I mean it's also full of those little like moments too, where like and maybe this is reader error possibly, but like the Metalhead moment is just like, oh, there's like a cool little reference to a Turtles thing, right? But it's also actually
it's a little bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's a Chekhov's gun because later in the thing when it's like, oh, what would the Turtles Zord be? Oh, it's a giant Metalhead, So It's like you're throwing some seeds out there to sprout later.
Yeah, and all those seeds are laid out in that one page that I was talking about where they talk about the shrink ray and Metalhead. It's all right there on one page that pays off at the end of issue 4.
Yeah, and you mentioned the thing about the test drive, which I forgot about, but like down later in the series, for various reasons, the Power Rangers can't morph anymore. So the Turtles kind of take on that role temporarily. So then there's a reference to like the test drive thing when they're like pulling out the Zords and stuff and figuring that out. It is just a neat little story where you're like, what are the things that would be fun and interesting to see as with this kind of crossover, and how can we build a story around it that's also entertaining and can sustain a few issues.
One other thing, again, I could just gush about all the nerdy stuff in this. I really enjoyed like Zach and this is all an issue 2 as well that I'm gushing over. I think that's probably the most fan servicey episode where they do a good job of advancing the story, but they also go like, look at all these things these characters get along with and how well they get along and how much they like each other. Like Zach, there's a really great transition where Trini and Raphael are having a moment where they're both like, oh, you have size, I got size, or I got daggers, you got size. They're kind of the same thing. And Raph says, and if they ever do, they usually run away screaming. And then you see a thought bubble from off screen going, oh man, that's tough. You're thinking like, oh, what's going on? And it's Zach and Mikey having a conversation, and Zach says, I guess pepperoni, sausage, and garlic. They're talking about like their favorite pizza toppings.
Yeah.
And then Zach also mentions that he likes pineapple, and Mikey goes, oh, pineapple on pizza? Gross, dude. And then he goes on to say that his favorite toppings are jelly beans, onions, and butterscotch.
Yeah, like there's a couple of like jokey kids fantasy pizzas that are referenced. 201, they are odious. And you know what? Pineapple on pizza is pretty good. Sorry, I'll say it. I'll say it.
I'll to each their own. I'm the kind of person who'll put ketchup on a hot dog or a brat. So like, I'm not gonna poo poo on anyone, because I know there are foodie purists out there that are tar and feather me if they could, because I put ketchup on a hot dog. Oh my God.
Don't set foot in Chicago with that.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit more about the story here, because the main premise of getting the turtles, or the turtles and the Rangers together, is that Tommy is in New York looking for a friend of his who has joined the Foot Clan, and Tommy's just he's Tommy, so he's amazing at everything he does, and he rises up the ranks of the Foot. He gets brought in to do a job to steal some kind of MacGuffin that never really, it's not that important to the plot, but it does serve a purpose. But he reveals that he's a Power Ranger, and Shredder had like his suspicions because Tommy's friend turned on him. And that leads to Shredder stealing Tommy's power morpher, and Shredder becomes the Green Ranger. Rita is like, oh, I sense that someone else has used my power coin, so let's see what's going on here. And Rita and Shredder decide that they have mutually beneficial goals, and Power Ranger / Turtle havoc ensues.
Yeah, I think at every point, it's doing the classic superhero team up thing, right? Where we meet, there's a misunderstanding, we fight, and then we team up. And that's, Rita and Shredder do that too, where there's a whole sequence where they're like trying to kill each other, and then they realize, oh, we still hate each other, but if we work together, we can fight them. And there's like lots
we can defeat our common enemy. And they even come to the mutual understanding with the idea that they will eventually pick up their fight where they left off, and eventually just someone will kill one of them.
Yeah, and you're seeing like interactions with like the, again, it's sort of, we're seeing the analogs kind of interact, right? Where like Rita's little cadre of freaks is hanging out with Bebop and Rocksteady, and we're seeing the Putties and the Foot Clan soldiers in the mix. And then later down the line, one of the things they do is like, oh, here's some soldiers that they're Putty Foot Clan guys.
Yeah, they're Putty Foot hybrids, and they go a little rogue, which is what helps turn the tide in the battle, because Tommy's able to look at his friend and be like, look at these guys. This is not who you want to be, and they clearly don't care about you, so you're going to stick with the mindless zombies, or you're going to come with me, someone who claims that they care about you. Which, that story, that's like the human element of all of this, because like Tommy loses his morpher for 4 of the 5 issues.
Yeah.
If memory serves. I never knew that Tommy was adopted.
I'm not sure I knew that either.
Yeah, so the series reveals that information as well, at least for someone like me who dropped off at some point when they decided to add a little bit more characterization to these archetypes.
Yeah, well, it's so weird too, where like for a lot of like this time period of the show that they're kind of set in, right, where there is a Green Ranger, this Tommy's like a guy who shows up occasionally. Like there's the big arc, right, that introduces him, and then it's like, oh well, he's just kind of a part-timer, where sometimes he's around and then sometimes he's not, and it's not until the White Ranger season that he's like a full-timer, like he's the leader of the thing.
Yeah, if I remember, which this is going deep into my Power Rangers knowledge, Super Sentai, the Green Ranger and the Red Ranger were actually brothers in that series, and the Green Ranger died, so they had like no extra footage of the Green Ranger for going forward. So they were like, okay, well, Tommy's done. And then like obviously merchandising took off because the Green Ranger has like the coolest design ever.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, we got to find a way to bring him back. And so they had to create all new footage to be able to bring him back, which is why the shield looks different too, is the original shield was made out of like fiberglass and broken shipment, and they had to just make one. So they just like sewed a bunch of cotton together on it with a gold fabric. But I really enjoyed that the turtles were largely the Rangers were largely autonomous in this as well. Like Zordon and Alpha help out a little bit, but they're not a key factor in like what turns the tide. Like Zordon does his little speech when the Megazord is happening, and they bring the whole thing together with the giant metal head. But for the most part, Zordon and Alpha don't play a huge role, and I kind of like that because it just shows that even as teenagers, these Power Rangers are formidable, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and that kind of comports with you know, I think we both have read at least the first couple of years of this reboot that we were talking about, the 2016 Boom Studios run.
Yeah,
And you know, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers as a show is very formulaic, where like the characters are very stock, and then sometimes there's an issue that relates to one of their primary personality traits, but it's like we have to justify something where we're running the footage of them fighting the guy in the putties, and like then we're running the footage of the Megazord coming in, right? Or like one of the things I think that a comic like this gives you the opportunity to do is like expand them as like actual characters, right? And do things that like for whatever reason, whether it's because they didn't have that footage to pull from a Super Sentai show, or we didn't have the sets or the money or whatever else, we just never got to. Like one of the things that I always think is interesting about this comic, and then back to the Boom Studios books, is like they, you know, every Power Ranger has a weapon that's associated with them, right? But in the show, it's so rare that they ever like actually use them for any real reason. Like it's usually in my memory, it's just to do the thing where they combine into a big bazooka thing.
yeah, they got rid of it after season 1, because I remember I bought the sword set that they had where it came with the axe, the bow, and everything, or I should say my parents bought it for me. And that came out with season 1, and like all the merch that came out there.
Yeah.
But there was a big backlash from parents of like the show was too violent. Matt's kicking too many kids. Where so they ended up cutting footage to reduce the use of those weapons, because like if you go back and watch those episodes when they're using the Super Sentai footage, you can see moments where like Jason or Trini or like they're using quick clips of like, oh, Billy's got his bow staff with the power staff or power lance, that's what he has, but like he hadn't pulled it out prior, but because they needed this action spot with the power lance, he's gonna have it here because that's what fits it best. So
yeah, and it's and again, at least in my memory, they don't stick out as weapons they use, right? I'm sure there's shots of like Jason cutting down a putty with his sword or something, right? But it's not the thing that you see very often. Where like here, almost every shot where they're like about to go into action or they're jumping into the fray, they all have their weapons, right? Where it's the thing where it's like Power Rangers fundamentally is like Americans repurposing a bunch of old Japanese TV footage.
Mm-hmm.
Where like the comics here are like, okay, well, like what are the things that we can do with these pieces that are interesting and tells good stories and expands on the things that like sort of spark the imagination from the show. So I think, you know, all this is to your point about the Rangers sort of being autonomous, and I think that is in line with those Boom comics in general, just insofar as like the characters, they're like more interested in like the characterization of the Rangers as opposed to, all right, Jason's mad about a tournament and you know there's a bully and that relates
they can
to
fit
the big
they
monster,
can fit more character stuff into a long form storytelling device as well.
Yeah.
Because and that's one thing Kyle Higgins, when he rebooted the series, or when he launched the series, really, he had mentioned that he wanted to bring these characters into the modern day in a way that we remember how we feel we remember they were, or how we feel we remember they made us feel. So like the archetypes are still foundational from the series, but they've just expanded them into fully fleshed out characters, and not just like, this is Jason, he likes karate and he's the leader, and this is Trini and she likes kung fu and she is very calm and serene, and here's Billy, he's a nerd. Like they're actual people now in the comics, and the Ryan Parrott just did a phenomenal job, more phenomenal to turn a phrase, And to like talk about like the weapons, the first time the turtles morph, which again, they don't waste time. At the end of issue 3, Billy's like, I have an idea. And you see the turtles and April holding the morphers. And then by like page 3 of the next issue, they're morphed, which like, again, full fanboy moment. I can hear Leonardo say it's morphin' time. And I love the fact that like they nerd out about it before they say it too, because like there's a good characterization moment too, where Raph is talking to Leo and he's like, I don't like fighting out in the open. We're going to be Power Rangers. We're going to be covered up. People won't really know. And then Mikey says, dude, you got to say the thing. And like, come on, do we really? And he's like, okay, how often are we going to really have this chance? And then he says it's morphin' time, which again, the art by Simone di Meo, just fantastic. Like I feel that page. I feel that panel where Leo says it's morphin' time, and then you see them do their call out, and then the costume design of the turtles as Power Rangers, I think, is really good too. They don't have like the classic like diamond with the like half patterns going out. It's just one diamond in the middle, and then their shells are kind of pseudo Green Ranger shields in a way.
Yeah.
But like it works. You see it and you're like, yeah, that's what it should be.
Yeah, and it's fun the way they think through who's going to be which color too, because it's like they are associated with the color more than like the role, right? Where like Leonardo is the Blue Ranger because he's the blue one, but Raphael is red because he's red, but the Red Ranger is the leader. So it's like I'm pretty sure there's even a joke about that, but it's like they're thinking through like what the turtles are associated with the color more than anything else. So like, what's the color of this set that makes sense with like Michelangelo? I think he's yellow, and then Donatello is black mostly because there's no real equivalent to the purple. And then April O'Neil is pink because, well, she's the girl, right? That's how Power Rangers works.
Yeah, I do like that at the end of the event, April's like, hey, and yeah, I look great in pink.
Yeah.
But I like that they call out Raph for having to still be red. And they're like, Raph, can you drive the Zord? He's like, I don't know. Like, well, you gotta be red, so
the red one is the guy that drives.
He's the driver, yeah. What did you think of the Ninja Ranger look that they gave the depowered Power Ranger crew?
It was neat. I watched long enough to be kind of checking in and out when they were like the Ninja Rangers were actually like part of the show. Actually, that originates in that first movie, right? Which I definitely saw.
Yeah, and we've had this discussion before. Technically the movie is its own space.
Right.
But and then they do that origin again, but that they do that with the Ninja character instead of the sexy He-Man lady.
Yeah, but either way, like there's the thing where like they have the half transformation or whatever, where it's like we morph into ninjas and then we morph into Power Rangers. Anyway, so I don't know if this I was reminded of that. I don't know how much they're like specifically echoing that because I don't think most of those characters are around at the time when they are Ninja Rangers. A couple of them are, I think. I guess the first movie is mostly the original cast, right?
No, actually, Jason, Zach, and Trini would all be replaced by the time the movie came around.
Oh.
I actually talked to Austin St. John about that when I met him at Comic-Con many years back now. He and Walter Jones and Tui Trang were all contracted to be in the movie, but they wanted to get paid more.
Sure.
And that's why they got replaced.
Yeah, because it was the biggest thing in the world, and I'm sure they were getting paid nothing because they were nobody actors. And then
and among other things, like one of the things that Saban does to keep the cost down is that they use non-union actors.
Yeah. Yep, I believe that, absolutely.
I mean, that you can kind of gather that from the acting skill, but but yeah, I found all of that really interesting. That it makes perfect sense, and like in non-strike times, like businesses can do whatever they want to do, but it does kind of suck that they take advantage of these young actors who are trying to make it big, but then they can't get out of a contract because they don't have a union backing them.
Again, I'm sure it's a thing, we're getting into kind of the weeds, but I don't trust Saban and Entertainment. Rest in peace, maybe. I don't know if it's still around, but I'm sure whatever they were getting paid probably seems more reasonable when it's like it's your first gig, it's just a kid's show. And then on to the next thing, right? And then it becomes this phenomenon where like no way they're getting cuts of the merch. No way, like, so it makes sense that they're like, hey, we should get paid more because we are, making the show happen. And then, unfortunately, as opposed to something like Friends, where they have leverage to like get paid $1 million an episode or something. The guy who getting his first gig filming in a juice bar on Fox Kids TV, it doesn't have that leverage probably.
Yeah, Saban Films is still around, or Saban Brands is still around, as they've moved on to becoming like a film production company. They have one movie coming out that I was surprised that they were associated with, but I can't remember what it is. I think it might have been Safe House, but like a lot of these look like they're really bad, straight to home video, straight to streaming kind of movies. I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds because they don't need any extra money.
The Ninja Rangers stuff was cool, just because it's a nice kind of it's sort of the opposite side of the coin as the Turtle Rangers stuff, where it's like, oh, we're one of the fun things we're doing when we're banging the action figures together is, oh, we're switching roles. So like they're slinking in the shadows. They're also figuring out, oh, we can do all this stuff without the superpowers or whatever happens to them when they morph, right? Where it's like, it's just us. We don't have these special abilities. We can still do our fun karate because we all hang out in the juice bar all day and, do, hip hop kicks
keto.
or whatever Zach did. His
hip hop keto.
Certainly problematic.
Created by Sir Walter Jones himself. Yeah. So like, I know with other series, we tend to talk about like the ramifications, but this is very much self-contained. There's not a huge ripple effect. It did create a sequel, which from what I've seen, and maybe we'll discuss it if we ever get into TMNT 2, Mighty Morphin TMNT 2, there clearly is a setup for a third one. Because when I finished this one, I was like, I thought they teased something at the end of this, which like there's a tease at the end of this where Rita and Shredder, Rita betrays Shredder and Shredder takes her to Dimension X. And that's the setup for the sequel. Yeah. And Rita's going to work with Krang and his people. I forget what they're called, but it does the Saturday morning thing where the heroes win, the bad guys get away. No one technically dies, although like there is a lot of like Civil War levels of destruction of New York in this final two issues.
There's a bunch of big giant guys walking, like destroying Central Park, basically. Like the last fight is like the Technodrome
Bebop, Rocksteady, and Goldar, I think, are all massive. They get grown.
Yeah, and the Technodrome like comes out of the middle of Central Park, and then the Zord shows up, and then giant Metalhead shows up, and they're almost certainly people are getting trampled.
Oh yeah,
underneath. Yeah, I'm curious. Again, I'm not well versed in these comic runs. This miniseries. I've never read the ongoing IDW TMNT book. I think I had fallen off the Power Rangers book by this point when this comes out. But I'm curious to know like how much, if at all, it ties into, if these are assumed to like fall into some kind of continuity with those, or if it's, the kind of thing where, I don't know, there's a TMNT Batman crossover, right? Where like, I'm not assuming that between issues of Batman, he's hanging out with the Ninja Turtles. It's sort of its own thing, right?
Yeah. So from what I have inferred, they do make reference to Tommy being in an alternate dimension, fighting a different version of himself, which is a reference to the Shattered Grid event.
Yeah.
Which I believe kicked off on like issue 35 of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers run.
Yeah,
and that ran through issue 50, I believe, or like issue 48, and then Kyle Higgins ended his run at issue 50. So like they reference that, so it clearly takes place after the Shattered Grid event. But Ryan Parrott did say in interviews that he left the time frame a little loose because he did want this to be approachable. So like there is like that one reference to Shattered Grid, but everything else just kind of, this could have been immediately after the episode where Trini overcomes her fear of heights.
Right.
And they can go on from there essentially.
Yeah. Maybe one of those things where like, any given like tie-in novel to a TV show where like maybe it's canon until we like until the show directly contradicts it, right? Where
Yeah.
If it's not, if nobody in the main comic is saying, oh, one thing that's never happened to us is meeting and hanging out with giant turtles, then you can kind of mentally slot it in wherever you want or discard it if you want, as like sort of your own personal canon. Like I can jive with that.
Yeah. And I do think there is a place for these kind of, for lack of a better word, one-off or like hidden series within a continuity of a show that kind of just gets folded over because it's not important to an overall story arc. Because like I remember in the 90s, we're going off on a big tangent here, but there was like I remember that my cousins had a Superman versus the Xenomorph comic, which I need to see if that's on DC Universe. That's when I've been meaning to go back to see how bad that is.
The people who own the Xenomorphs now are
that's
friends
true.
at Disney, so almost certainly not.
But I mean, that probably would have been published by DC, or maybe it was published independently with like DC's approval, because I do remember it being pretty gory.
Maybe, who knows? Like those are the rights of those are weird. Where like,
This is why we have Google. I can look it up real quick.
There was a whole miniseries where DC and Marvel finally fought each other and then merged with each other for a while.
Oh yeah, Amalgam Comics has become a huge thing in the podcasting landscape. Like I can't go too far in our Twitter scape right now without seeing someone talking about Amalgam Comics.
Yeah, and I can guarantee those books are not on either of the two apps because I'm sure it's all weird legal ownership hell.
Yeah, it's published by Dark Horse, so it probably wouldn't be on DC Universe.
Yeah, and I would bet that Warner Brothers wouldn't play nice to let Marvel republish it either. But I think they have published, like, they've republished like Dark Horse Star Wars books and stuff like that. So I'm sure some of those Aliens comics have been republished, but probably not that one.
Written by Dan Jurgens and Chuck Dixon with art by Dan Jurgens and John Bogdanove.
Yep. The man who killed Superman himself, Dan Jurgens. Well, one of them, but yeah.
I mean, he does have the Superman Returns mullet.
Yeah, would have been probably about that time.
1995. I know we're way off topic here, but now I'm just curious.
That's a bygone era though, where like, people made a big deal about Marvel versus DC, but it was like that was a time where they did that shit all the time, where it was just like, oh, Spider-Man and Batman hanging out, or Daredevil and Superman, or whatever else, where it was just like so much easier for somebody at Marvel to call someone at DC and be like, hey, you want to do a book? And now it's like, oh, we're all owned by these like massive conglomerates, and Ike Perlmutter is not going to let anyone use Spider-Man in a comic that might sell for DC Comics or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of where, from what I understand, the writer's strike was at a big standstill because I think it was who's the Amazon guy?
Bezos, right? Unless I'm thinking of another Amazon guy.
Maybe it was Bezos, or yeah, I think it was Bezos. Bezos and Warner Brothers HBO guy,
David Zaslav.
Yeah, so those two
destroyed the HBO brand.
Yeah, well, those two apparently were playing real hardball with the writers, and from what I understand, they're also playing real hard with the actors. And because those two were not willing to budge on certain negotiation points, like, or at least they were trying to stand still and break the writers union into a submission hold, they weren't willing to budge on certain streaming things, which I still haven't looked through or found like a good breakdown of the writer's strike deal or the writer's deal. I believe they're supposed to be publicly releasing accurate viewing numbers now, instead of being like, Red Notice is the most watched thing ever on Netflix, but we're also broke.
I don't know if they are going to publicly release them, or I know that, like, first thing, the writer's strike, huge success. Like, from what I also have not read the actual deal, but from all accounts, from like writers, from people who I follow that I trust about this, every single thing that they said, this is not negotiable, you're never going to get this, they got every single one. Like, huge win for the writers. but I want to say, and again, I've not read the actual deal, but I want to say it's not like a thing where Netflix will publish its numbers in Variety, like ABC will publish like their their ratings or whatever. But I think there is a way in which it's like there are statistic based residuals that someone who is not just like some bean counter at Netflix gets to see, and they're like then calculating what people get paid based on that. But I could be wrong about that. It's possible that they're going to say, put out numbers every
Yeah.
month or something, but I don't think so.
One person I would recommend following on Lonnie's platform, if you haven't found like a good source for the writer's strike, Scripts by James, spelled out as it sounds. It's the full words. He's someone I found on Twitter a while ago. He's a really good follow. He seems like a genuinely good dude, and he's got a Disney Plus animated, or Disney Plus, nope, just a Disney show, animated feature or animated show that he's working on called Haley's on it. But he had a really good breakdown. It was very long, but it was really good. And he basically echoed the same sentiments that they said we wouldn't get it. We got it.
Yep. It's also so funny. Like, I know we're way in the weeds here, but the writer's strike went on for 5 months, and it was just constant chicanery by the studios where like they're lowballing the writers. They are like doing the thing where they say, we want to meet, we're going to do a media blackout, and then they turn around and like give some bullshit to the Hollywood Reporter immediately, right? We're just out in the open. They're going on record and saying like the goal is for these people to start losing their houses, and then they'll come to the table, like just the most craven stuff that everyone can see. And then they turn around and do it again to the actors. Like,
this isn't even 2007. Like, information is so readily available, and like the facts can be found so quickly that they have no legs to stand on, even when they get mouthpieces like the Hollywood Reporter, the New York Times, whatever, to badmouth the unions.
Yeah, and you would think like, okay, we really want to get back to work. We gave them this deal. They would just like, it seems weird that they're then again in the position of like trying to lowball the actors, even though it's just so funny that they think we fucked this one up, but we'll get the next one, and then they continue.
Yeah, and the really funny thing is that they keep releasing these stats of like, we're losing $400 million this month, when it would cost them like $80 million extra on top of what they've already been paying the actors to get the deal done. Like, it's not that much extra money, but they're like, no, because long-term gains, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But 400 million today compared to 400 million spread out over what, 7-8 years?
Yeah, they're losing more money than it would take to just sign on to everything that are being asked. And it's such a funny, I know we're way out here now, but
yeah,
we're in this moment where like the strikes are happening, like video games are seeing like it's a bloodbath where like studios are laying people off constantly and like talking about the economy and whatever else, sales. And it's so funny that it's like, oh, we need to cut all these jobs. We're losing so much money. How much are you making at the top, buddy?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure I guess your $1 billion paycheck is protected, but who's going to make all the shit you sell?
Yep. And we can go on and on about this. Like, this is something that you and I both like kind of live forward to talk about, but this isn't the podcast for that. But Power Rangers, TMNT, I cannot recommend this comic enough. If you have a love for either or both of these franchises, I cannot, again, recommend it enough. Ryan Parrott, I think, hits it out of the park. It hits the ground running. It does all the things you want it to do and more.
I don't know that I'm very familiar with Ryan Parrott before this. Like, it's a name that I recognize, but I don't know if I have actually knowingly read anything by him. And I may have to see what else he's written and see if anything jumps out, because this was, again, I wasn't sure how this was going to hit me, just because, for the millionth time, I have an appreciation for these franchises, but they're things that I kind of left behind as a kid. So I was not like, oh yeah, Power Rangers and TMNT, I love those dudes. I was like, oh yeah, I'll read it and I'll see how it hits me. And I, for what it is, it's not as like huge as the other comics we talked about, like I mentioned, but it was a good time. It was fun. It looks good. It is a breezy, fun read. So I think I'm gonna have to look up Ryan Parrott and see if anything else he's written has, sounds good.
Yeah, he's at some point, I think is around like issue 10 or 12 of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers run that Kyle Higgins had. They created a second book that was called Power Rangers, and then there was Mighty Morphin, and it was all building up toward, the two books were both building up towards Shattered Grid. The Mighty Morphin series was like post Green Ranger Power Rangers, so like Tommy was part of the team, and then the Power Rangers team was like everything pre Tommy, building up towards the Shattered Grid story and beyond.
Right.
Ryan Parrott was laying a lot of groundwork with that.
I have
and then
read
he took
some
over,
of that. Yeah.
And then he took over the mainline Power Rangers run when Kyle Higgins ended his run.
Yeah, so I've read some stuff by him. That might be where I recognize his name, because
and he also he's also part of the Massive Verse. He's writing the Rogue Sun series.
Oh yeah, I have bought a bunch of those issues, but have not actually found the time to read them yet. So Ryan Parrott,
it's good stuff.
Ryan Parrott is the background radiation of my life, and I didn't realize it.
Yeah, one issue that when you get to it, if you find the time, I think it's Rogue Sun 7 or 9. It's a choose your own adventure issue.
Oh, that's exciting.
I need you to tell me how you get through it, because I think it took me about 35 minutes to read that issue. It usually takes me about 15-20 minutes to read a regular comic issue, but it took me about 35 with that one, because I kept looping with this gimmick, and it was so fun. And by the time I figured it out, I was like, oh, you son of a bitch.
Oh, I've read, he's done some DC stuff. I've read a couple of these things. So yeah, I've read a bunch of his stuff without realizing it. Sorry, Ryan Parrott, for not taking.
Oh, he's done some Star Trek stuff too.
Oh, I didn't know that. Now I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, and then the Star Trek tie makes sense a little bit, because if you go back and listen to our Massive Month episode with Kyle Higgins, apparently he was working at Ryan Parrott was working at Bad Robot in the early 2010s. So like him having a tie to.
Yeah, I see that he was an assistant to J. Abrams on Star Trek Into Darkness, which I won't hold against him.
He probably tried to tell JJ it was a bad idea. I'm gonna go on a limb and say that.
Yeah, let's give him the benefit of that doubt.
So let's start wrapping up. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to be here and reading this comic with me.
Yeah, always happy to be here.
And most importantly, thanks everyone so much for listening. And again, if you haven't, go back and please listen to our Massive Month episodes. The Infernal Girl Red Kickstarter got funded.
All right.
So raise the roof for that. Thank you to everyone who listens and funded that. Please don't forget to join our Discord. Matt, please tell everyone about the Discord.
Yeah, Discord is our cool little chat room where we hang out and chat about all this stuff like this basically all the time. If you like this, it's basically what we do over there, but in text form, up to and including my long-winded, extremely verbose rants. It's a good time. Come hang out with us.
Yeah, don't forget to join the Discord. You can follow us on all of the social media platforms at Talking Smack Pod on Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Post News, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Lonnie's website. Email us any comic suggestions, movie reviews, thoughts, questions, concerns at tsmackpod@gmail.com. Thank you to Leo Allen for our musical themes that you're hearing right now. Please like, subscribe, rate, review. And again, most importantly, thank you so much for listening. Take care, and we will see you next week when we have the Video Game Club on to educate me on the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. See you next week.
So sorry. Why would you do that to yourself?
I thought it'd be funny.
It's not gonna be. It's not for you, at least. I'm just really sad to know that you're gonna have to go through that.
Who loves T-Smack?
I love
Watch
T-Smack.
start.
Is it true? Mm-hmm. I do. Ooh.
Watch Star Trek or whatever.